The Apache shuddered as the RPG detonated against its armored flank. Inside the cockpit, Major Catherine Sullivan fought the controls as warning lights flooded the instrument panel in crimson. The night vision display flickered, threatening to plunge her into total darkness above the Iraqi desert. Systems critical. Hydraulic failure imminent. The onboard computer's dispassionate voice barely registered through the cacophony of alarms. Behind her in the gunner's seat, Captain Marcus Hayes groaned. Raven, left side's gone. Can't reach the weapon systems. Sullivan, call sign Raven, didn't waste breath responding. Every ounce of her focus channeled into keeping the wounded bird airborne. The mission parameters scrolled through her mind with machine-like precision. Extract the Delta team from the target zone. Deliver the intelligence package, return to base. Simple. Clean. Except for the Iraqi Republican Guard Battalion that wasn't supposed to be there. Another impact rocked the helicopter. This one wasn't an RPG-heavy machine gun fire ripped through the weakened armor plating. The Apache lurched violently to port. Hayes, Sullivan barked. Status? Silence. The absence of response told her everything. Hayes was either unconscious or dead, and she was now piloting a critically damaged AH-64D Apache longbow with no gunner 20 miles inside enemy territory, and a squad of America's most elite operators depending on her extraction. The year was 91. The Gulf War was officially over, but no one had bothered to tell the men firing at her helicopter. Sullivan's mind calculated trajectories, fuel consumption, and damage assessments with cold efficiency. The primary hydraulic system was gone. The backup would fail within minutes. The targeting system was offline, but the rotor still turned, and that meant she still had options. She banked hard. Right, dropping the Apache to 30 feet above the desert floor, low enough that the swirling sand obscured her from ground-based targeting systems, but high enough to avoid the deadly obstacles of the desert terrain. Her hands moved across the controls, with practiced precision, toggling systems, rerouting power, bypassing damaged circuits. The extraction point appeared on her heads-up display, a small wadi 2 kilometers ahead, where 6 Delta operators waited with the intelligence that had cost 3 men their lives to secure. Intelligence that, according to her briefing, could prevent another war. Sullivan keyed her radio. Reaper team, this is Phantom Actual. Be advised I am coming in hot. 1 pass, 1 pickup. You'll have 30 seconds. The squad leader's voice crackled through the static. Copy, Phantom. We're combat ready. Where's your wingman? Not coming. Sullivan didn't elaborate. The second Apache had taken a direct hit 5 minutes into the ambush. There would be time for reports and condolences later. Maybe. She lined up the approach, fighting the aircraft's increasing instability. The backup hydraulics were failing faster than she'd calculated. The collective control was becoming sluggish, the cyclic vibrating wildly in her grip. Most pilots would have ejected by now. Most pilots weren't Sullivan. The wadi appeared a dark scar in the night vision landscape. She could see the heat signatures of the Delta team positioned in defensive formation around a small package, the intelligence. Sullivan brought the Apache into hover, its wounded systems screaming in protest. The aircraft swayed dangerously, threatening to spin out of control at any moment. Now move now, she shouted into the radio as she lowered the helicopter to within 6 feet of the ground, keeping the rotors clear of the wadi's steep sides by mere inches. The Delta operators moved with practiced efficiency, scrambling aboard through the side access panel, dragging their wounded and the precious cargo. The helicopter pitched with each additional weight, its systems approaching catastrophic failure. Clear! The squad leader's voice came through both the radio and from behind her position. Sullivan didn't wait. She yanked the collective, simultaneously adjusting the cyclic to compensate for the imbalanced hydraulics. The Apache clawed for altitude, shuddering like a wounded animal. 500 feet. 1,000. The helicopter vibrated violently, metal groaning against metal. Warning systems no longer blared, they had failed completely. Sullivan was flying by feel now, her body attuned to every shudder and pitch of the dying aircraft. Ma'am? The Delta leader appeared in the cockpit doorway. Hayes is gone. Sullivan nodded once, not taking her eyes from the instruments that still functioned. Secure for crash landing. We're not making it to base. The next 40 minutes stretched into an eternity. Sullivan nursed the failing Apache across the desert, heading for the Saudi border in friendly territory. The hydraulic systems failed completely 15 minutes in, forcing her to control the aircraft through direct manipulation of the mechanical linkages, a feat considered theoretically possible but practically suicidal. When the Apache finally settled onto the desert floor 3 kilometers inside Saudi territory, the rotors slowing to a stop with a final metallic groan, Sullivan sat motionless in her seat, hands still gripping the controls. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat, muscles trembling from the sustained effort of keeping the helicopter airborne through sheer will. The Delta commander placed a hand on her shoulder. Never seen anything like that in 20 years of combat, Major. That wasn't flying. That was something else entirely. Sullivan didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Hayes's empty seat, the dark stains visible even in the dim cockpit lighting. The package made it, the Delta officer said quietly. Whatever's in it, you just made sure it was worth the price. Yeah, the motel room smelled of industrial cleaner, and decades of cigarette smoke ground into the carpet. Sullivan Catherine, now not Major, not Raven, not for many years, sat on the edge of the sagging bed, the springs protesting even her slight weight. At 58, her frame was lean, hardened by years of service and tempered by time. The auburn hair was now steel gray, cropped short against her skull, in a style that hadn't changed since her active duty days. The digital clock on the nightstand read 5:13 a.m. She'd been awake since 4, sitting in the same position, staring at the worn duffel bag on the room's only chair. Inside it, wrapped in a faded bandana, was a photograph she hadn't looked at in months and a set of wings she'd promised to deliver. Eagle Ridge Air Force Base lay 20 miles to the northwest, its lights visible at night from the motel parking lot. Today she would walk through its gates as a civilian with special authorization for simulator time. Today, she would fulfill a promise 34 years in the making. Catherine rose her movements, economical, precise. Old habits never died, they just deepened their grooves. She showered and dressed in tan cargo pants and a simple black t-shirt. No insignia, no patches, nothing to indicate her former rank or service. The only concession to her past was the desert boots, actual combat boots, from her last deployment, preserved like relics. She unzipped the duffel and removed the wrapped bundle. The photograph had faded somewhat over the decades, 3 figures standing before an Apache on some nameless airfield in Saudi Arabia. Her in the center, flight helmet tucked under one arm. Hayes to her right, his perpetual half-smile visible despite the desert grime. And to her left, Lieutenant Colonel James Barrett, their intelligence officer, looking uncomfortable in the desert heat. Only Barrett had made it to retirement. Hayes died that night in 1991. And Sullivan, Catherine closed her eyes. She hadn't died, but Major Sullivan had ceased to exist in any official capacity after 2002. After Operation Shadowfall, after the program was buried, she carefully rewrapped the photograph and placed it back in the duffel alongside Hayes's pilot wings. Then she shouldered the bag and stepped out into the Arizona morning, where the air already shimmered with promise of the day's brutal heat. It was time to awaken ghosts. Catherine approached the security checkpoint at Eagle Ridge with the measured stride of someone who had walked through countless military gates. The guard, young Board, probably counting minutes until his shift ended, barely glanced up from his clipboard. ID and purpose of visit, he said, the words worn smooth from repetition. She handed over her civilian ID and the authorization form. Catherine Sullivan, I have clearance for Apache simulator time at 0900. The guard's eyes flicked up, reassessing her. Civilian clothes, older woman requesting combat helicopter simulator time. His confusion was evident, but the authorization was properly signed and authenticated. Building 7, he said, finally handing back her documents. Someone will meet you. Catherine nodded and continued through the gate, feeling the guard's curious gaze follow her. She was used to it, had been since the day she'd first walked into flight school in 1988, one of only 4 women in a class of 60. The looks had changed over the years, from outright hostility to curiosity to occasionally respect, but they had never stopped. The base hadn't changed much from the dozens of others she'd served on over her career. The same functional architecture, the same precise layout, the same rhythm of personnel moving with purpose. Catherine oriented herself, quickly heading toward the cluster of buildings that would house the training facilities. Inside the operations center for Building 7, 2 men lounged near a desk. The older one, mid-30s, aviator sunglasses perched on his head, despite being indoors, wore the rank of colonel and a nameplate identifying him as Reeves. The younger, a captain named Mitchell, according to his uniform, was nursing a protein shake with the religious devotion of the perpetually fit. Catherine approached the desk. Catherine Sullivan, I have authorization for Apache simulator time. Slots booked for 0900. Colonel Reeves looked up, his expression transitioning from boredom to disbelief. He glanced at Captain Mitchell, a silent communication passing between them. "You want to what now?" Mitchell asked, making no effort to hide his amusement. "Fly the Apache simulator." Catherine repeated, her voice level. She placed her authorization on the desk. Reeves picked up the document, making a show of examining it closely before dropping it back onto the desk with barely concealed disdain. "Look, ma'am," he drawled, leaning forward. "I don't know who signed this or who you know, but we're running qualification assessments today. The simulator isn't available for tourists. The authorization is signed by your base commander." Catherine said, her tone unchanged. Mitchell snorted. "I don't care if it's signed by the Joint Chiefs. The Apache isn't a joyride for retirees looking for a thrill." Catherine regarded them both with the same steady gaze that had faced down superior officers' enemy fire and impossible missions for over 2 decades. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't even change her expression. She simply picked up her authorization, folded it once, and stepped back. "You're welcome to wait," Reeves called after her, but the answer's still going to be no. Catherine moved to a metal folding chair positioned against the wall where she could observe both the operations desk and the hallway leading to the simulator rooms. She sat with her back straight, duffel bag at her feet, hands resting lightly on her knees. From her position, she could hear the two officers resume their conversation, their voices deliberately pitched to Carrie. "Some people watch Top Gun once and think they're Maverick," Mitchell said, prompting a chuckle from Reeves. "Probably some general secretary who got him to sign off on it as a favor," Reeves replied. "They'll let anyone play soldier these days." Catherine closed her eyes, letting their words wash over her like distant artillery, noted, assessed, and dismissed as irrelevant to the mission. Her mind drifted back, not to Iraq in 1991, but to a classified briefing room in Langley, Virginia, 1992. The room had no windows and only one door. The table was polished oak, incongruously elegant for the cinder block walls and fluorescent lighting. 5 people occupied the space, Catherine still wearing the rank of major. 2 men in unmarked military uniforms, a woman in a tailored civilian suit, and a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with the stars of a general on his collar. "Major Sullivan," the general began. "I'm General Marcus Hayes. These proceedings are classified at the highest level. What you hear in this room does not exist outside these walls. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Catherine replied automatically, though confusion flickered across her features. "General Hayes." The resemblance to Captain Hayes was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same penetrating gaze. The father of her fallen co-pilot. "Your actions in Iraq last year have brought you to our attention," the woman in the suit said, her voice precisely modulated. "My name is Elizabeth Winters. I represent certain interests within the intelligence community." Catherine maintained her professional composure, but her mind raced. Her after-action report from that night had been classified immediately. The official records stated that both Apaches had been lost in a training accident near the Saudi border. "What you did with that Apache shouldn't have been possible," one of the uniformed men said. "The manufacturer's engineers said the aircraft couldn't remain airborne with that level of system failure. Yet you flew it for 40 minutes and landed without additional casualties." "I had good training, sir," Catherine replied neutrally. General Hayes leaned forward. "No, Major, you had something beyond training, something that can't be taught." He slid a folder across the table. "We're establishing a new program, highly classified, direct action capabilities outside conventional operational parameters." Catherine opened the folder. Inside was a single page with a project designation, Phantom 7. "We need pilots who can do the impossible," Winter said. "Pilots who can operate in environments where conventional forces cannot go under conditions that would be considered unsurvivable for objectives that cannot be officially acknowledged." "Why 7?" Catherine asked, her tactical mind already analyzing the implications. "7 pilots," General always answered. 7 Apaches modified beyond anything in the current inventory. 7 missions that will never appear in any record. The second uniformed man spoke for the first time. "The missions will be executed under presidential finding only. No congressional oversight, no record in the DoD or CIA databases. For all official purposes, Phantom 7 does not exist, and neither will you if you accept." Catherine looked up sharply. "Explain." "Your military service record will show an honorable discharge effective next month," Winter said. "You'll officially transition to civilian status. Unofficially, you'll report to a training facility designated Site Echo in Nevada, where you'll begin preparation for your first operational deployment. And if I decline," General Hayes met her gaze, "then you walk out that door, return to your unit, and retire with full honors when your 20 is up. This conversation never happened. Catherine studied the four faces watching her. The weight of the decision pressed down like G-forces in a combat turn. Discharge from the army she'd fought to join. Separation from the official chain of command. Operations without acknowledgement or backup. And yet, Captain Hayes, she said quietly, your son, he told me before that last mission that he followed you into the service. That flying was in your family's blood. A shadow crossed the general's face. Marcus was an exceptional pilot, and from his final communications, you were an exceptional teammate. Catherine nodded once. When do I report to Site Echo? The facility sprawled across a hidden valley in the Nevada desert, invisible from any public road or airspace. Catherine arrived via unmarked helicopter blindfolded for the final 30 minutes of the journey. When they removed the blindfold, she stood before a complex that officially didn't exist. The next 6 months were the most intense training she had ever experienced. The other 6 pilots selected for Phantom 7 were all exceptional combat veterans with distinguished records and unique skills. Like her, they had all officially retired from military service. Their aircraft were unlike any Apache she had ever flown. Superficially identical to the standard AH-64D, the Phantom Apaches incorporated classified technologies that wouldn't become standard for decades, advanced composite materials that reduced radar signature, electronic warfare suites that could disable enemy communications, weapons systems that left no ballistic evidence. They trained day and night in all weather conditions, pushing both aircraft and pilots beyond established limits. They learned to fly without instruments, to navigate by terrain recognition alone, to execute precision strikes with minimal collateral damage. They became ghosts, appearing without warning, striking with surgical precision, vanishing without trace. Their missions began in 1993. Small-scale operations, at first extracting compromised assets from denied territory, eliminating high-value targets deemed untouchable by conventional forces, gathering intelligence in regions where official American presence would constitute an act of war. Catherine, now designated Phantom Actual, as the lead pilot, executed each mission with methodical precision. The years blurred together in a succession of night operations, classified briefings, and the constant knowledge that they operated without a safety net. If captured, their country would deny their existence. If killed, their families would never know the truth. By 1998, Phantom 7 had conducted 32 successful operations across 3 continents. Their existence was known to only a handful of individuals at the highest levels of government. Even within the intelligence community, they were merely a rumor. The ghost helicopters occasionally reported in conflict zones, but never confirmed. And then came Operation Shadowfall. The Hindu Kush Mountains stretched across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border like a prehistoric beast, their jagged peaks cutting into the night sky. Catherine piloted her Apache through a narrow valley, maintaining an altitude of just 200 feet, low enough to avoid radar detection, high enough to clear the treacherous terrain. In the gunner's seat behind her sat Colonel Marcus Hayes, son of the general, who had recruited her, now a full member of Phantom 7. Over the years, their professional relationship had evolved into a deep friendship forged in the crucible of shared secrets and impossible missions. Approaching Waypoint Delta, Hayes reported, his voice calm in her headset. Still clear on thermals. Their mission was straightforward in concept, nearly impossible in execution: infiltrate Taliban-controlled territory, identify and eliminate a training camp established by an emerging terrorist network called Al-Qaeda, and extract with confirmation of the camp's destruction. No official American involvement could be acknowledged. No evidence of their presence could remain. Intelligence suggested that the camp harbored individuals connected to recent embassy bombings and was planning something far larger. Something that, if successful, would change the course of global politics. I have visual on the target, Hayes reported as they cleared a ridge. Matches intelligence estimate. Approximately 40 structures, vehicle depot on the eastern perimeter. Multiple heat signatures. Catherine adjusted their approach vector, bringing the Apache into position for the initial strike. The aircraft hummed around her, its modified systems operating in near silence. Another Phantom program enhancement. Weapons free, she confirmed. Primary targets are the command building and communications array. Hayes activated the targeting system, the modified Hellfire missiles locking onto the designated structures. Ready on your mark. Execute. The missiles launched with minimal backwash, yet another classified modification streaking toward their targets with unerring precision. The first impacts registered as brief flashes of light in the valley below, followed by secondary explosions as ammunition stores detonated. Catherine banked the Apache circling for Hayes to assess damage and identify secondary targets. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, until it wasn't. The first indication of trouble came as a brief flash from the mountainside to their west. Before Catherine could react, the proximity alarm blared. A shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile was tracking them. She executed an evasive maneuver, simultaneously deploying countermeasures. The missile detonated 50 meters behind them, close enough to rock the Apache but not damage it. "We've got active hostiles on the western ridge," Hayes reported, his voice tight. "They were waiting for us." The realization hit Catherine with cold clarity. This was an ambush. Someone had compromised their mission parameters. Switching to terrain-following mode, she announced, dropping the Apache to just 100 feet above the valley floor. "Prepare for immediate exfiltration." More missile launches erupted from the mountainsides, accompanied by the distinctive crack of heavy anti-aircraft guns. Catherine pushed the helicopter through a series of maneuvers that strained both the airframe and physics, staying ahead of the tracking systems. They were 3 minutes into their escape when the first round struck the Apache's tail section. Warning lights flooded the cockpit. Catherine compensated immediately, adjusting the controls to maintain stability. Hayes damage assessment. "Tail rotor taking damage, hydraulic pressure dropping on the starboard side. We can still..." The second impact cut him off mid-sentence. This one struck directly beneath the gunner's position. The Apache lurched violently, nearly rolling over before Catherine regained control. "Hayes," she called, unable to see behind her. "Status." His voice came weakly through the intercom. "Hit. I'm hit. Continuing mission." Catherine's training took over, compartmentalizing the fear for her friend as she focused on extracting them from the kill zone. The Apache was wounded now, its movement sluggish but still responding to her commands. They cleared the valley, entering a narrow mountain pass that offered some protection from ground fire. Catherine allowed herself a moment of hope. They might make it to the extraction point, where a stealth transport waited to recover them. "Almost clear," she reported. 10 minutes to extraction. Hang on, Hayes." No response. Hayes acknowledged. Silence. Catherine engaged the autopilot for a brief moment, a dangerous choice in the narrow confines of the pass, and twisted to check on her gunner. What she saw froze her blood. Hayes slumped in his harness flight suit, soaked with blood from a wound in his lower abdomen. His eyes were open, but unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Marcus," she abandoned call signs in her urgency. "Stay with me." His eyes flickered toward her voice. "Knew you'd use my first name, eventually." A weak smile crossed his features. "How bad?" Catherine returned to the controls, unable to answer immediately. The truth was written in the amount of blood pooling beneath his seat. Without immediate medical attention, Hayes wouldn't survive. "We're making the extraction point," she said instead. "Medevac standing by." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There was no medevac. Phantom operations had no medical support beyond what they carried themselves. "The package," Hayes said, his voice stronger for a moment. "Confirm?" "The package." Catherine checked the mission systems. The specialized cameras had captured the destruction of the target with the required verification markers. "Package secured, mission accomplished." Hayes nodded slightly, then coughed. Blood speckled his oxygen mask. "Good, that's good." The mountain pass narrowed further, barely wide enough for the Apache's rotor span. Any other pilot would have considered it impassable, especially with a damaged aircraft. Catherine threaded the needle her entire being focused on, bringing them home. "My son," Hayes said, suddenly his voice fading. "Jason, he's 14 now, wants to fly too." "You'll teach him," Catherine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Hayes was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was little more than a whisper. "Promise me you'll watch over him, make sure he knows." "Knows what?" Catherine asked, desperately trying to keep him conscious. "The truth about what we did, why it mattered." "I promise," she said, her vision blurring momentarily before she forced her emotions back under control. "I'll tell him when he's ready." Hayes didn't respond. In the reflection of the cockpit glass, Catherine saw his head slump forward. She completed the mission alone, landing the damaged Apache at the extraction point with mechanical precision. The ground crew rushed forward, medical personnel reaching Hayes first. Their expressions told her what she already knew. Colonel Marcus Hayes, call sign Spectre, died at 3:47 hours in a valley that appeared on no official maps during an operation that would never be acknowledged, serving a country that would bury his sacrifice in the deepest vaults of classification. 3 weeks later, Catherine stood at his grave in Arlington National Cemetery, watching from a distance as his family received the carefully sanitized version of his heroism. The official story: a training accident in the Nevada desert, a mechanical failure, an honorable death in service to his country. General Hayes spotted her at the edge of the gathering. Their eyes met briefly, shared knowledge and grief passing between them. He gave her a barely perceptible nod, both acknowledgement and dismissal. Her presence risked questions neither of them could answer. Catherine turned away, fingering the pilot's wings in her pocket, Hayes's wings, which the general had quietly passed to her after the funeral. A token of what really happened, a physical manifestation of her promise. She would keep that promise, but not yet. Not until the boy was old enough to understand. Not until she could tell him the whole truth about his father's sacrifice and about the terrorist training camp they had destroyed, one that intelligence would later confirm had been planning the early stages of an attack involving civilian aircraft in American landmarks. An attack that would never happen thanks to Operation Shadowfall. But the operations center at Eagle Ridge had grown busier during Catherine's wait. Young pilots moved through the space, some throwing curious glances her way. Colonel Reeves and Captain Mitchell remained at their station, occasionally looking in her direction and exchanging comments that caused others to laugh. Catherine didn't move, didn't check her watch, didn't show any sign of impatience or discomfort despite the growing heat of the Arizona morning. She had learned patience in the Hindu Kush, in the deserts of Iraq, in the mountains of Bosnia. She had waited hours in hostile territory for extraction windows measured in seconds. This was nothing. At precisely 0847, the operations center door opened, and a man in an Air Marshal's uniform entered. Tall, lean, with the weathered features of someone who had spent decades in cockpits and command centers. His insignia identified him as Air Marshal James Barrett. Catherine's pulse quickened slightly, though her expression remained neutral. Barrett, the intelligence officer from Saudi Arabia, the man who had been present at that first briefing about Phantom 7. He would be approaching retirement age now, but the years had been kind to him. Barrett paused just inside the doorway, surveying the room with the practiced eye of a senior officer conducting an inspection. His gaze swept across the personnel, the equipment, the operations board, and stopped when it reached Catherine. For a moment, he simply stared, recognition dawning slowly across his features. Then his eyes dropped to her neck, where her turned collar revealed the edge of a small tattoo. Not a decorative design, but a functional marker. 2 crossed rotors beneath a stylized dagger, with a small arrow crossed by a horizontal line beneath it. The blood drained from Barrett's face. Catherine met his gaze evenly, neither acknowledging nor denying what they both knew. The mark on her neck identified her as more than just a retired pilot. It marked her as Phantom Actual, the commander of a unit that officially never existed, the veteran of missions that would remain classified for 50 years. Barrett approached her slowly, as if approaching an apparition. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Catherine rose to her feet, her posture automatically shifting to military attention despite her civilian status. "Marshal Barrett." His eyes never left the tattoo. "I couldn't help but notice your ink. That's very specific artwork." "It is," she agreed. "Mind if I ask where you got it?" Catherine held his gaze for a long moment, weighing decades of secrecy against the necessity of her current mission. Finally, she spoke 2 words that confirmed everything Barrett suspected: Hindu Kush. Barrett drew a sharp breath, his professional composure momentarily shattered. "You're Phantom Actual." It wasn't a question, but Catherine nodded once in confirmation. Barrett glanced toward the operations desk where Reeves and Mitchell were watching with undisguised curiosity, then back to Catherine. "What are you doing here?" Catherine's expression softened fractionally. "Keeping a promise." Understanding dawned in Barrett's eyes. "Hayes, his son. Jason graduates flight training next month," Catherine said. "Before I attend, I need to know if I can still fly, if I'm still worthy of wearing these." She patted her duffel bag where Hayes' wings lay wrapped. Barrett straightened, decision made. "Wait here." He strode to the operations desk, his bearing radiating authority that had Reeves and Mitchell standing at attention before he reached them. "Are you the officers who denied simulator access to the woman waiting over there?" Barrett's voice carried across the room, deliberately pitched to be heard. Reeves cleared his throat. "Yes, sir, we have qualification assessments scheduled." "Did you examine her authorization?" "Yes, sir, but regulations state." Barrett cut him off with a raised hand. "Which one of you is the senior instructor?" Reeves straightened further. "I am, sir, Colonel William Reeves." Colonel Reeves, effective immediately. You will prepare the Apache simulator for full operation. No limitations, no safety protocols, full weapons and electronic warfare systems enabled. Mitchell stepped forward. Sir, with respect, civilian access requires— She is not a civilian, Barrett said, his voice deadly quiet. The woman sitting over there has more combat flight hours in Apache helicopters than everyone in this facility combined. She has flown missions you will never read about in places you cannot pronounce against enemies that officially don't exist. The operations center had fallen completely silent. Every eye turned toward Catherine, who remained seated, expression unchanged, posture perfect. But Sir Reeves began, confusion evident in his voice. She's not in uniform. There's no record of— There wouldn't be, Barrett interrupted. Her service record is classified at levels you don't have clearance to know exist. He leaned closer to the two officers. The woman you've been mocking for the past hour is a legend, gentleman. One of the finest combat pilots this country has ever produced. And you will give her access to that simulator, or I will personally ensure that your next assignment involves cataloging spare parts in Antarctica. Am I clear? Yes, sir, both officers responded in unison. Barrett turned back to Catherine, gesturing for her to join him. As she approached, he lowered his voice. Phantom Actual. I never thought I'd see you again. After Shadowfall, after the program was shut down, we were told you were dead, Catherine supplied. Officially, I was. Unofficially, I've been living in Arizona for the past 15 years. Watching, waiting. For what? Catherine's eyes held the weight of decades of classified operations and buried truths. For the right moment to fulfill my promise to Hayes. His son Jason is in the final phase of Apache training. Top of his class, just like his father. Barrett nodded slowly. Does he know about you, about what his father really did? No, Marcus wanted him to know the truth, but only when he was ready. Only when he had earned his wings on his own merits. They reached the operations desk where Reeves and Mitchell stood at rigid attention, their earlier disdain replaced by uneasy respect. Colonel Reeves, Barrett said formally, this is Catherine Sullivan. She has my authorization to use the simulator for as long as she requires. Reeves nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. If you'll follow me, Ms. Sullivan, I'll prepare the simulator immediately. As they walked toward the simulator bay, Barrett matched his stride to Catherine's. The simulator has been updated with the latest Apache configurations. The controls are different from your day. A ghost of a smile touched Catherine's lips. I've kept current, Marshal. Some habits die hard. Barrett studied her profile. What exactly are you planning to do after this? After you've proven you can still fly. Catherine's expression hardened resolve evident in every line of her face. First, I attend Jason's graduation. I give him his father's wings and tell him what Marcus Hayes really died for. She paused. And then I tell him about the men who buried the truth, the ones who shut down Phantom 7, not because the threat was gone, but because we knew too much. Barrett's step faltered. That's dangerous ground, Sullivan. Those men are still in positions of power. I know, Catherine replied calmly. That's why I needed to see if I could still fly the Apache. Because before this is over, I may need to do more than just talk. They reached the simulator bay doors. Beyond them lay the sophisticated replica of the Apache cockpit and the first step in fulfilling a promise 34 years in the making. Catherine Sullivan, once known as Phantom, Actual took a deep breath and stepped forward into the past and toward a reckoning that would shake the foundations of power in Washington. Some ghosts refused to stay buried. Some promises couldn't be broken. And some truths demanded to be told no matter the cost. The Apache simulator hummed to life, its systems powering up with a familiar sequence of tones and indicator lights. Catherine Sullivan settled into the pilot's seat, her hands automatically finding their position on the controls. Despite the decades since she'd last flown a real Apache, her muscle memory remained intact, the body remembering what the mind might have forgotten. Colonel Reeves hovered nearby, his earlier contempt replaced by wary curiosity. The system's been completely upgraded since you would have flown, Ms. Sullivan. The control interface is different, more digital than analog. The weapon systems are H-64E Guardian Block 3 configuration, Catherine interrupted without looking up. Upgraded sensors, improved target acquisition, network systems, integration, enhanced survivability. Maximum speed is still around 175 knots, though they've improved engine efficiency for better range. Her fingers danced across the instrument panel, testing responses, gauging sensitivity. And they finally fixed that lag in the tail rotor responsiveness during sharp bank maneuvers. Reeves stared at her, mouth slightly open. How do you... I keep current, Catherine said simply. Behind them, Air Marshal Barrett suppressed a smile. I'll handle her briefing, Colonel. You can monitor from the control room. Reeves hesitated, then nodded and withdrew, closing the simulator cockpit door behind him. Barrett leaned closer to Catherine, speaking quietly. They'll be watching everything you do in here, analyzing, questioning. These kids think they're the best of the best. Show them what that really means. Catherine's hands stilled on the controls. What scenario are they loading? Barrett's expression grew serious. Standard evaluation course, 3 mission profiles, basic flight operations, weapons deployment, and combat evasion. Nothing you haven't done 1,000 times. Catherine nodded, but something in Barrett's tone raised her suspicions. He wasn't telling her everything. Before she could press him, the radio crackled. Simulator active in 30 seconds, Captain Mitchell's voice announced. Starting with basic flight operations in desert terrain. Wind conditions moderate, visibility optimal. The screen surrounding the cockpit illuminated, presenting a startlingly realistic desert landscape. Rolling dunes, scattered rock formations, a distant mountain range shimmering in the heat. Catherine completed her pre-flight checks, testing the responsiveness of each control. Everything felt different, more sensitive than she remembered, yet somehow more forgiving. Commence basic flight operations, Mitchell instructed. Catherine lifted the simulated Apache into a hover, feeling the aircraft's virtual weight and balance. She executed a series of basic maneuvers: forward flight, banking turns, rapid ascent and descent, with the precise control of someone who had spent thousands of hours in the cockpit. In the control room, Reeves and Mitchell watched in silence, exchanging glances as Sullivan completed each maneuver with textbook perfection. Transitioning to weapons deployment scenario, Mitchell announced after 15 minutes. The desert landscape shifted now, featuring target structures scattered across the terrain. Objective: neutralize all targets while minimizing collateral damage. Catherine engaged the targeting systems, quickly noting the differences from her era. The interface was more intuitive, the response time faster. She dispatched the targets methodically, each missile and cannon strike precisely placed for maximum effect with minimal spread. Final scenario loading. Mitchell's voice had lost its earlier condescension. Combat evasion under hostile conditions. The simulator screens flickered, then resolved into a new landscape, one that made Catherine's breath catch in her throat. Jagged mountains rising from narrow valleys. Rocky outcroppings perfect for concealing anti-aircraft batteries. The unmistakable terrain of the Hindu Kush. This wasn't a standard evaluation scenario. This was Operation Shadowfall. Catherine's hands tightened on the controls, her mind flashing back to that night in 1998. Haze bleeding out behind her, the desperate flight through the mountain pass. The promise made and kept for decades. You knew, she said quietly, knowing Barrett could hear her. Not my call, Barrett replied over a private channel. Reeves programmed it from the classified archives. He has clearance for the geographic data, but not the mission parameters. He doesn't know what he's activated. Catherine swallowed hard, pushing back the memories threatening to overwhelm her. Then let's show him how it's done. She guided the Apache into the simulated valley, maintaining NOE nap of Earth flight profile mere feet above the terrain, using the contours of the land to mask her approach. In the real world, she'd been flying an extensively modified aircraft with stealth capabilities. This standard simulator couldn't replicate those advantages. Hostile forces detected, the simulator's artificial intelligence announced. Multiple SAM sites activating. Catherine didn't hesitate. She banked the Apache sharply, left dropping even lower, using a ridgeline to block the incoming missile's line of sight. In her mind, she wasn't flying a simulator in Arizona. She was back in Afghanistan, fighting to bring Hayes home. In the control room, Reeves leaned forward, watching intently as Sullivan navigated the scenario with uncanny precision. She knows this terrain, he muttered. She's anticipating the threat locations before they appear. Mitchell nodded slowly. It's like she's flown this exact mission before. Barrett remained silent, his expression unreadable. Inside the simulator, Catherine executed a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed the virtual aircraft to its operational limits. The scenario had been designed to be unwinnable, a fact unknown to her, but increasingly obvious to the observers as she continued to evade or neutralize threats that should have overwhelmed any pilot. Adding atmospheric complications, Reeves announced, his professional curiosity now fully engaged. Severe wind shear and reduced visibility. The simulator screens darkened, swirling with virtual dust and debris. Catherine adjusted immediately, relying less on visual cues and more on instrument readings and her innate sense of the aircraft's movement through space. Hydraulic system failure, Reeves added, upping the difficulty further. Port side controls compromised. Catherine's lips tightened into a thin line. Just like that night, too similar to be coincidence. The simulator was now recreating the exact conditions under which Hayes had died. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, compensating for the simulated damage rerouting systems maintaining flight integrity despite the cascading failures. Where most pilots would have ejected or crashed, she continued the mission profile, adapting to each new complication with methodical precision. "This is impossible," Mitchell whispered in the control room. "No one can fly with that level of system degradation." Barrett finally spoke. "She's done it before." In the simulator, Catherine reached the extraction point, a narrow clearing barely large enough for the Apache's rotor span. Under normal conditions, setting down would be challenging. With compromised hydraulics, damaged tail rotor, and the simulated wind shear, it should have been suicidal. She brought the helicopter to a hover 6 feet above the designated landing zone, compensating for the crosswinds with subtle adjustments to the collective and cyclic controls. The Apache descended with agonizing slowness, the virtual ground creeping closer inch by inch. When the landing skids finally touched down, the control room erupted in stunned silence. "Simulation complete," the computer announced. "All mission parameters achieved. Performance rating exceptional." Catherine sat motionless in the cockpit, hands still gripping the controls, sweat beading on her forehead. The screens faded to black, leaving her in darkness, save for the dim glow of the instrument panel. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, letting the memories of that night in Afghanistan recede once more into the compartmentalized darkness where she kept her past. The cockpit door opened. Barrett stood there, concern evident in his expression. "You okay?" Catherine nodded, once her composure returning. "That wasn't a standard evaluation." "No," Barrett agreed. "Reeves pulled the geographic data from a classified archive. He didn't know its significance. And you didn't stop him." Barrett's gaze didn't waver. "You needed to confront it eventually, before you faced Jason Hayes." Catherine unbuckled her harness and stood, her movements deliberate, controlled. "Did I pass your test, James?" Barrett stepped aside to let her exit. "With flying colors. But that's not what matters. Did you prove what you needed to prove to yourself?" She didn't answer immediately, stepping past him into the briefing room where Reeves and Mitchell waited. Both men stood as she entered, their expressions transformed from earlier skepticism to undisguised respect. "Miss Sullivan?" Reeves began, his tone formal. "That was the most impressive simulator performance I've ever witnessed. You flew scenarios designed to be unbeatable." Catherine regarded him coolly. "Nothing is unbeatable, Colonel. Some situations just require more creative solutions." Mitchell stepped forward, curiosity overcoming military formality. "Where did you learn to fly like that? The techniques you used aren't taught anywhere in the standard program." "They wouldn't be," Catherine replied. "Most of what I did in there died with my unit." A flicker of recognition crossed Reeves' face. "Your unit? You were part of something classified, something beyond standard special operations." Catherine glanced at Barrett, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "The secrets of Phantom 7 were still classified, but some limited disclosure might be necessary." "I flew missions you will never read about," she said carefully, "in places that don't appear on official maps against enemies that our government couldn't officially acknowledge." Reeves and Mitchell exchanged glances, the implications sinking in. Before they could ask more questions, the briefing room door opened. A young woman in the uniform of a captain entered, her insignia indicating she worked in base security. Her nameplate read Chen. "Colonel Reeves," she said, her voice professionally neutral, but her eyes fixed on Catherine. "I need to speak with you regarding our visitor's credentials." Reeves frowned. "Captain Chen, Ms. Sullivan's authorization has been personally verified by Air Marshal Barrett." Chen hesitated, glancing between Barrett and Catherine. "Sir, there's a discrepancy I need to address. In private." Barrett stepped forward. "Captain, whatever concerns you have about Ms. Sullivan can be addressed to me directly." Chen straightened, clearly uncomfortable, challenging a superior officer but determined to complete her duty. "With respect, sir, I've been conducting routine security verification on all non-military personnel accessing flight systems. Ms. Sullivan's background check has returned unusual results." Catherine remained impassive, but internally she was calculating possibilities, escape routes, contingencies. Chen had been digging into her past, a past that had been systematically erased from all official records when Phantom 7 was established. "Explain," Barrett demanded. "Her military service record ends in 1992 with an honorable discharge," Chen said. "But there are gaps, references to classified assignments that were redacted, and no record at all of operations in Afghanistan during the period she claims to have flown there. Catherine met Chen's gaze directly. Captain, have you ever heard of need-to-know classification? Of course, ma'am, but then understand this, you don't need to know. Catherine's voice remained level, but carried an authority that made Chen instinctively stand straighter. My service record is classified at levels that require direct presidential authorization to access. Your routine security check doesn't have the clearance to penetrate those firewalls. Chen flushed slightly but held her ground. Ma'am, I'm only following protocol. When inconsistencies appear, I'm required to report them and request verification. Barrett intervened. Captain Chen, I personally vouch for Miss Sullivan's identity and authorization. Any further investigation into her background requires my direct approval. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Chen replied, though her expression remained troubled. However, protocol requires me to file a report regarding the discrepancies. File your report, Barrett said dismissively. Address it to my office. I'll ensure it receives appropriate attention. Chen nodded stiffly, cast one more curious glance at Catherine, then withdrew from the briefing room. When the door closed behind her, Barrett turned to Catherine with a concerned expression. She's going to keep digging, Catherine nodded. Young, ambitious, detail-oriented. Reminds me of myself at that age. She could complicate things. Or become an asset, Catherine countered. She's thorough. That could be useful. Reeves cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Ms. Sullivan, while I don't understand the full situation here, I owe you an apology for my earlier behavior. Your skills are extraordinary. Catherine acknowledged his apology with a slight nod. Your simulator was an adequate test, Colonel, though the scenario selection seemed specifically designed to challenge me. Reeves had the grace to look embarrassed. I selected the most difficult terrain and conditions in our database. I didn't realize it might have personal significance. Few things happen by coincidence in my experience, Catherine replied. She turned to Barrett. I need access to personnel records, specifically the current flight training roster. Barrett raised an eyebrow, looking for someone in particular. Jason Hayes, I need to know where he is in his training cycle, who his instructors are when his final qualification flights are scheduled. Mitchell interjected. Hayes, we have a trainee by that name. Lieutenant Jason Hayes, he's in the final phase of combat qualification, due to complete his check ride next week. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. After decades of waiting, of watching from a distance, she was finally approaching the moment when she would fulfill her promise to Marcus Hayes. Where is he now? She asked. On a cross-country navigation exercise, Mitchell replied. Should return to base around 1600 hours. Catherine checked her watch. Nearly 5 hours from now. I'll wait. Barrett shook his head. Not here, too many curious eyes, too many questions. He addressed Reeves and Mitchell. What happened in this simulator stays in this room. Ms. Sullivan's presence and performance are classified. You will not discuss them with anyone, including Captain Chen, without my explicit authorization. Understood. Both men nodded, their military discipline overriding their curiosity. Catherine at Barrett continued, Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private. I have a secure office on base. She followed Barrett from the simulator complex, aware of the stares from instructors and trainees they passed. Word had already spread about the mysterious civilian woman who had mastered the unbeatable scenario. In a military environment, such information traveled at speeds that would make an Apache envious. Barrett's office was located in a separate administrative building, its windows overlooking the airfield where actual Apaches sat in orderly rows, their sleek profiles gleaming in the Arizona sun. He closed the door behind them, engaging an electronic privacy system that would prevent eavesdropping. That was a hell of a demonstration, he said, dropping the formal manner he'd maintained in front of the others. You haven't lost a step. Catherine moved to the window, watching a flight of training helicopters approach the runway. The new systems are more intuitive, almost makes it too easy. Nothing about flying an Apache has ever been easy, Barrett countered. You just made it look that way. He paused. I need to know what you're really doing here, Catherine. After all these years, why now? Why risk exposure? She turned from the window, studying Barrett's face. They had history, not romantic, but the deep connection forged between intelligence officers and the operators they sent into danger. He had briefed her on dozens of Phantom 7 missions, had been the voice in her ear during extractions, had mourned with her when team members didn't return. You know why, she said finally. Hayes made me promise to tell his son the truth when he was ready. Jason is about to become an Apache pilot. It's time. Barrett moved to a small cabinet, removed 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon. He poured 2 fingers in each glass, offering one to Catherine. The truth is still classified. Telling him about Operation Shadowfall, about what his father really did, would violate at least 6 federal statutes. Catherine accepted the glass but didn't drink. Some promises transcend classification. And some secrets are kept for good reasons. Barrett took a sip of his bourbon. After Phantom 7 was shut down after you were discharged, I was assigned to a security detail protecting the families of former unit members, including Jason and his mother. This was new information. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Protecting them from what? Barrett set his glass down, his expression grave. There were concerns that certain foreign intelligence agencies had identified Phantom 7 operators despite our best efforts at anonymity. Your tattoo wasn't just for identification among friendlies, it made you targets if captured. I'm aware of the risk we took, Catherine said sharply. What does this have to do with Jason? After 9/11, after the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq became official, there was concern that our earlier, unofficial operations might come to light, that someone might connect the dots between those early missions and what came later. Catherine's mind raced ahead of his explanation. They were sanitizing the record, erasing evidence of Phantom 7's existence. Barrett nodded. Operational security, they called it. I called it covering their asses. Some of the missions we ran in the 90s. They violated international law, sovereignty agreements, congressional oversight requirements. We prevented attacks that would have killed thousands, Catherine countered. We eliminated threats before they could materialize. I know that. You know that. But politics doesn't work on what we know. It works on what can be proven, what can be denied. Barrett refilled his glass. The same people who authorized Phantom 7 later ordered all traces of its existence purged from the record. And when records couldn't be purged, he left the sentence unfinished, but Catherine understood. Her face hardened. The operators themselves were purged. Barrett didn't confirm or deny, but his silence was answer enough. How many, she demanded? 3 confirmed, 2 more suspected, all ruled accidents or natural causes. Catherine processed this information with the same calm efficiency she applied to combat situations. And you think Jason might be in danger if I tell him about his father's real work? I think, Barrett said carefully, that some very powerful people have invested considerable effort in ensuring Phantom 7 remains a ghost story, a rumor dismissed by serious analysts. Catherine moved away from the window, pacing the small office like a caged predator. Who's left from the original unit? Besides you, just Morgan and Westfield. Morgan disappeared off the grid 10 years ago, completely untraceable. Westfield took a position with a private military contractor. He died in Baghdad in 2007. Convenient, Catherine remarked darkly. Very, Barrett agreed, which is why I've been watching you all these years, making sure your cover held. When you showed up here today, it triggered every alarm I've established. Catherine stopped pacing, fixing Barrett with an intense stare. You've been monitoring me, protecting you, he corrected. The same way I've been protecting Jason, making sure the connection between you was never established. Until now. The implications settled over Catherine like a physical weight. Her presence at Eagle Ridge had potentially compromised not only her own safety, but Jason's as well. Yet she couldn't abandon her promise to his father. I need to see him, she said finally. Need to assess for myself if he's ready for the truth. Barrett studied her for a long moment. And if he's not, if telling him puts him in danger, then I'll protect him, Catherine replied without hesitation. The way I should have protected his father. Before Barrett could respond, his secure phone buzzed. He answered, listened briefly, then hung up, his expression grim. What is it? Catherine asked. Captain Chen has been busy. She accessed classified archives using my security credentials. Apparently she's better at computer systems than protocol. She found a reference to Operation Shadowfall in a declassified after-action report from 2002. Catherine tensed. How much does she know? Not the details, but enough to be dangerous. She submitted a formal inquiry to DoD Archival Services requesting mission parameters and personnel records. That will raise flags at the highest levels? Catherine said, mind racing through implications. How long before they respond? Hours, not days. And when they do, they'll send someone to find out who's asking questions about a mission that officially never happened. Catherine made a decision. I need to talk to Chen, bring her in or shut her down before she attracts the wrong kind of attention. Barrett hesitated. She's a by-the-book officer, ambitious, career-focused. If she thinks there's a security breach or historical injustice to uncover, then I'll give her something more important to focus on. Catherine interrupted. The truth about what really happened in the Hindu Kush and why it matters that some truths remain hidden. Barrett looked skeptical. That's a big risk. Calculated risk, Catherine corrected. We need allies here, James. People inside the system who can help navigate the bureaucracy without triggering alarms. Chen has the access and the skills we need. Barrett considered this, then nodded reluctantly. I'll arrange a meeting. Secure location off base. Catherine shook her head. No time. Have her meet us here. Now. And if she's not receptive to joining our little conspiracy, Catherine's expression hardened. Then I'll do what I've always done, adapt and overcome. Barrett made the call. Within 15 minutes, Captain Melissa Chen entered the office, her professional demeanor barely concealing her apprehension. She carried a tablet computer and a thin file folder marked with security classification stripes. Marshal Barrett, she began formally. I've discovered some concerning— Sit down, Captain, Barrett interrupted, gesturing to a chair. What you're about to hear is classified above your current clearance level. Officially, this conversation isn't happening. Chen hesitated, then took the offered seat, her gaze shifting between Barrett and Catherine. Sir, with respect, I believe Ms. Sullivan may have misrepresented her military service record to gain access to restricted systems. Catherine stepped forward. You found a reference to Operation Shadowfall. Chen couldn't hide her surprise. How did you— Because I was there, Catherine said simply. I flew the mission. I lost my co-pilot, Colonel Hayes' father. Chen's eyes widened. Lieutenant Hayes' father died in a training accident in Nevada. That's the official record. The official record is a lie, Catherine stated flatly, constructed to hide operations that the government needed to remain deniable. Barrett intervened. Captain, you've stumbled onto something bigger than a security protocol violation. Something that could endanger lives, including your own, if pursued through official channels. Chen's training and discipline warred with her curiosity. Sir, are you instructing me to ignore a potential security breach? I'm instructing you to listen, Barrett replied. Really listen, then make your decision. Catherine moved to the window again, gathering her thoughts. When she turned back to Chen, her expression had changed, no longer the guarded veteran, but a woman carrying the weight of secrets too long held. In 1992, I was recruited into a program codenamed Phantom 7. 7 pilots, 7 modified Apache helicopters, conducting operations that officially never existed. We targeted emerging threats before they became official concerns: terrorist training camps, illegal weapons facilities, high-value targets that conventional forces couldn't reach without triggering international incidents. Chen listened intently, her skepticism gradually giving way to fascination. One of our pilots was Colonel Marcus Hayes Jason's father. In '98, we flew a mission into Afghanistan to eliminate a training facility established by an emerging network called Al-Qaeda. The mission was compromised. Hayes was fatally wounded. I flew us out despite catastrophic damage to the aircraft. If this is true, Chen said carefully, why isn't it in the official record? Barrett answered. Because acknowledging these operations would have admitted that the United States was conducting military strikes in sovereign nations without declaration of war or congressional approval. It would have created diplomatic crises with half a dozen countries. And Catherine added, because the intelligence that led to these operations came from sources and methods that remain classified to this day. Chen processed this information, her analytical mind connecting dots. You're saying Lieutenant Hayes doesn't know how his father really died? No one does, Catherine confirmed, except those of us who were there, and now you. Chen sat back, the implications sinking in. Why are you telling me this? Catherine regarded her steadily. Because you're already involved. Your security inquiry will trigger automated alerts and systems designed to protect these secrets. Within hours, people will arrive to investigate who's asking questions about Phantom 7. People who have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that program remains buried. Are you suggesting a cover-up? Chen asked incredulously. I'm stating a fact, Catherine replied. Former members of my unit have died under suspicious circumstances. Records have been purged, witnesses reassigned or discredited. Barrett leaned forward. Captain, you have a choice to make. Continue your official inquiry and face the consequences that will follow. Or work with us to ensure that Lieutenant Hayes learns the truth about his father's sacrifice while protecting him from those who would keep that truth buried. Chen looked from Barrett to Catherine and back again, her expression troubled. This is a lot to process. You're asking me to circumvent security protocols, potentially violate regulations. I'm asking you to help, right or wrong, Catherine interrupted, to ensure that a hero's son knows his father died saving countless lives, not in some fictional training accident. A heavy silence filled the office. Chen stared at the file in her hands, weighing duty against justice, protocol against truth. Finally, she looked up. Lieutenant Hayes returns at 1600 hours. His debriefing will take approximately 45 minutes. After that, he typically visits the memorial wall before heading to the officers' quarters. She hesitated, then continued with more resolve. I can arrange for you to meet him at the memorial, privately, without attracting attention. Catherine felt a wave of unexpected emotion, gratitude, relief, apprehension. After decades of waiting, of watching from a distance, she would finally meet Marcus Hayes' son, would finally begin to fulfill her promise. Thank you, Captain, she said simply. Chen stood, her decision made. I'll need to delete my inquiry from the system before it propagates to higher security levels, and I'll need a cover story for why I accessed those files. Barrett nodded appreciatively. You're quick on your feet, Captain. That's a valuable trait. One more thing, Chen added, her expression serious. If what you're saying is true, if people have been eliminated to protect these secrets, then Lieutenant Hayes could be in danger simply by association with you, Ms. Sullivan. I'm aware of the risk, Catherine acknowledged. That's why I came here first, to assess whether I can still protect him if necessary. Chen raised an eyebrow. And can you? Catherine thought of the simulator of the skills that had remained sharp, despite the passing years of the muscle memory that had responded instantly to crisis. Yes, she said with quiet confidence. I can. Then I'll help you, Chen decided. But not just for Lieutenant Hayes. If what you're saying about Operation Shadowfall is true, then the historical record needs to be corrected even if it remains classified. Future generations of officers deserve to know what sacrifices were made in the shadows. As Chen left to make the arrangements, Barrett turned to Catherine with a mix of admiration and concern. You've still got it, that ability to inspire loyalty in complete strangers. Catherine shook her head. Not loyalty to me, loyalty to the truth. That's what separated Phantom 7 from the bureaucrats who buried us. We never lost sight of why we did what we did. Barrett refilled their glasses. To the truth, then, however inconvenient it might be. Catherine raised her glass. To Marcus and to promises kept. They drank in silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. In a few hours, Catherine would come face to face with the son of the man who had died in her aircraft. The son who had grown up believing a lie about his father's sacrifice. The son who deserved to know the truth no matter what danger that truth might bring. In the sky above Eagle Ridge, an Apache helicopter appeared returning from a training mission. Catherine watched it approach, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. So much like his father, she thought, even the way he flies. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the ghosts of Phantom 7 stirred once more, preparing to emerge from the shadows into the harsh light of day. The memorial wall stood in a quiet corner of Eagle Ridge, a simple granite expanse, bearing the names of pilots who had given their lives in service. Some had fallen in recognized conflicts, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Others had died in training accidents, their sacrifices no less significant for their lack of battlefield glory. And a few names represented deaths that occurred under circumstances never fully explained to the public, classified operations whose details remain locked in secured archives. Catherine Sullivan stood before the wall as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base. She found the name instantly, her eyes drawn to it as if by magnetic force, kept empty. Marcus J. Hayes, 1964 to 1998. The official record stated he had died when his Apache crashed during a night training exercise in Nevada. The bronze plaque made no mention of the Hindu Kush Mountains, of Operation Shadowfall, of the terrorist training camp he had helped destroy before America even recognized the threat it faced. Captain Chen had arranged for Catherine to access this restricted area, providing her with a visitor's badge that would withstand cursory inspection. The young officer had proven surprisingly resourceful, clearing security logs and creating a plausible cover story for Catherine's continued presence on base. He comes here every day, Chen had explained earlier, usually around 1700 hours after his debriefing. Stands for exactly 5 minutes, then leaves. Never misses no matter how exhausted he is from training. Catherine checked her watch, 16:52, 8 minutes until she would meet the son of the man who had died under her command. 8 minutes to prepare for a conversation she had rehearsed in her mind for decades. She heard footsteps on the stone pathway behind her, too early to be Jason Hayes. Catherine turned to see Barrett approaching, his expression grave. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. DoD security flagged Chen's initial query about Operation Shadowfall before she could delete it from the system. A special investigative unit has been dispatched from Washington. Catherine's expression remained calm, but her mind immediately shifted to tactical assessment mode. Timeline. They'll be on base by 2100 hours. Three-man team led by someone from the Office of Special Investigations. They're traveling under the pretext of a routine security audit, but the team composition suggests something more aggressive. Names. Barrett handed her a small tablet. Facial recognition just matched them at Phoenix Airport. The team leader is Colonel William Blackwood. Catherine studied the image, her face hardening. "I know him. He was part of the oversight committee that shut down Phantom 7, career intelligence officer with political ambitions." "He's more than that now," Barrett said quietly. "After 9/11, he was promoted to deputy director of a special access program that scrubbed all references to pre-war covert operations in Afghanistan. He personally signed off on the cover story for Hayes' death." Catherine handed back the tablet. "So he's coming to ensure his lies stay buried, and to find out who's asking questions that shouldn't be asked." Barrett glanced around the empty memorial area. "We need to move up your timetable. Meet with Hayes, tell him what you need to tell him, and get off base before Blackwood arrives." Catherine shook her head. "I've waited 27 years to keep this promise. I'm not going to rush it now because some bureaucrat is trying to protect his reputation." "This isn't about reputation," Barrett countered. "It's about national security protocols. Blackwood has the authority to detain anyone he considers a potential compromise, including you, me, and Chen. Let him try." Catherine said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge that reminded Barrett of the woman who had once flown the most dangerous missions in American military history. Before Barrett could respond, Chen's voice came through the small earpiece he wore. "Lieutenant Hayes is approaching the memorial area. ETA 1 minute." Barrett gave Catherine a searching look. "Are you sure about this? Once you tell him, there's no going back." "I made a promise," Catherine said simply, "to his father and to myself." Barrett nodded once, understanding the code that governed people like Catherine Sullivan. A code where promises were sacred and loyalty transcended official directives. "I'll run interference with base security, try to slow down Blackwood when he arrives. Chen will monitor communications and warn you if anyone approaches." He departed quickly, taking a different path to avoid encountering Jason Hayes. Catherine turned back to the memorial wall, composing herself for the meeting that would fulfill a decades-old obligation. The footsteps that approached a minute later were measured deliberate, the cadence of a military man honoring a ritual. Catherine didn't turn immediately, allowing Lieutenant Hayes to reach the wall and have his private moment before she intruded. From the corner of her eye, she observed him, 27 years old with his father's build and bearing. Dark hair cut to military precision, features that echoed Marcus Hayes, but with subtle differences inherited from his mother. He stood at parade rest before the wall, his focus entirely on his father's name. Catherine waited, respecting the moment. When exactly 5 minutes had passed, just as Chen had predicted, she spoke. "He would be proud of you," she said quietly. Jason Hayes turned, startled by the presence he hadn't noticed. His eyes, so like his father's, narrowed slightly as he assessed the stranger addressing him. "Excuse me, ma'am." Catherine stepped closer. "Your father, Marcus. He would be proud of the pilot you've become." Hayes's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "Did you know my father?" "Yes," Catherine said simply. "I flew with him." Confusion crossed Hayes's features. "That's not possible." "My father flew with the 101st Aviation Regiment. He died during a training exercise when I was 5. "That's what the official record says," Catherine acknowledged. "The truth is more complicated." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the pilot wings she had carried for decades, Marcus Hayes's wings, given to her by his father after the funeral. "He wanted you to have these when you were ready." Hayes stared at the wings, recognition dawning in his eyes. He had a matching set standard issue Army aviation wings that had been presented to him upon completing flight school. But these were different, worn smooth from years of handling, bearing the distinctive mark that identified them as his father's. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Catherine Sullivan. 27 years ago, I was known by a different designation, Phantom Actual. Your father was Phantom too. We flew classified missions that officially never existed." Hayes took an involuntary step back, his training and instincts warning him that this conversation violated security protocols. "Ma'am, if you're suggesting classified information—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Lieutenant," Catherine interrupted gently. I'm fulfilling a promise I made to your father as he died in my aircraft, not in Nevada, but in the mountains of Afghanistan in 1998. The color drained from Hayes' face. That's, that's not what happened. I've seen the accident report. You've seen a fabrication, Catherine replied, created to hide an operation that targeted a terrorist training camp 3 years before the United States officially acknowledged the threat. Hayes glanced around, suddenly aware of the potential security implications of this conversation. We shouldn't be discussing this here. There's nowhere on this base that isn't monitored, Catherine said. But for the next few minutes, Captain Chen has arranged a blind spot in the security system. We can speak freely. Hayes studied her face, searching for signs of deception or instability. Finding neither, he asked the question that had obviously haunted him for years. How did my father really die? Catherine held his gaze, unflinching. Bravely, completing a mission that saved countless lives. Operation Shadowfall was a direct action against an emerging terrorist network that had established a training facility in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Your father and I piloted a modified Apache on a black operation to eliminate that facility. She continued, providing details that only someone who had been there could know: the specific mountain range, the weather conditions, the type of defensive systems they had encountered. With each detail, Hayes' skepticism visibly eroded, replaced by a growing certainty that he was hearing the truth for the first time. The operation was compromised, Catherine explained. Someone had warned the target. We came under heavy fire during extraction. Your father was hit by anti-aircraft fire that penetrated the cockpit. Despite his injuries, he maintained weapon systems until he couldn't anymore. Her voice remained steady, but Hayes detected the subtle shift, the momentary break in her professional demeanor that revealed the personal weight of this memory. I flew us out with critical systems failing. Your father died during extraction, but not before ensuring the mission's success. Catherine paused, allowing Hayes to process this information. His last words were about you. He made me promise to tell you the truth when you were ready, when you had earned your wings on your own merits. Hayes stood motionless, his military bearing temporarily forgotten, as he absorbed this revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge of anger. Why wait until now? I've had my wings for 3 years. Because the truth was classified beyond top secret, Catherine replied. Because revealing it put both of us at risk. And because I needed to be certain you could handle not just knowing, but what might come after knowing. What does that mean? Catherine glanced at her watch. Time was becoming critical. It means that the people who buried the truth about Operation Shadowfall, who created the fiction about your father's death, are still in positions of power, and they're very invested in ensuring that fiction remains unchallenged. Hayes processed this with the analytical mind of a military officer. You're saying my father's death was covered up by our own government. By specific individuals within our government, Catherine clarified. People who authorized operations that exceeded their legal authority, then hid the evidence when those operations became politically inconvenient. Why tell me now? Hayes asked the tactical thinker in him, recognizing that timing was rarely coincidental in matters of national security. Because you're about to complete your Apache qualification. Because you deserve to know what your father really died for before you follow in his footsteps. Catherine held out the wings. And because I made a promise. Hayes hesitated, then accepted the wings, holding them reverently. These are really his, given to me by your grandfather, General Hayes, after the funeral. He knew the truth even though he maintained the official story publicly. A new understanding dawned in Hayes' eyes. My grandfather, he used to tell me stories about pilots who flew beyond the edge of the map. Said someday I'd understand what that meant. Catherine nodded. He was referring to Phantom 7. Your father was part of something extraordinary, Lieutenant. Something that made a difference when official channels couldn't or wouldn't act. Hayes closed his hand around the wings, his expression hardening with resolve. I want to know everything. The real mission, what you were targeting, why it had to be secret. And you deserve to know, Catherine agreed, but not here, not now. As if to emphasize her point, Chen's voice came through Catherine's concealed earpiece. Security alert, base perimeter reports an unscheduled arrival. 3-man team in an unmarked government vehicle. They've bypassed standard check-in procedures. Catherine's expression remained calm, but her posture subtly shifted, the combat veteran preparing for potential threat. We've run out of time. Blackwood is here. Who? Hayes asked. The man who wrote the false report about your father's death, Catherine explained. He's heading a special investigative unit sent to find out who's been asking questions about Operation Shadowfall. Hayes straightened, military training taking over. I should report this to my commanding officer. Your commanding officer doesn't have the clearance to know what I've just told you, Catherine countered. If you report this conversation, you'll be detained for questioning about a security breach. Blackwood will ensure you're isolated until he determines how much you know and what threat you pose to his carefully constructed narrative. Hayes hesitated, torn between his duty as an officer and his need to know the truth about his father. What do you suggest? Meet me off base, tomorrow, 0900 at the Canyon Ridge Motel Room 12. I'll tell you everything and show you evidence that confirms what I've said. Before Hayes could respond, Chen's urgent voice came through the earpiece again. Security teams mobilizing. They're instituting a base-wide credential check. Someone's accessing the surveillance archives for the simulator facility. Catherine made a quick decision. Lieutenant, I need to leave now. Your father sacrificed everything to protect this country from threats it didn't yet recognize. Honor that sacrifice by being careful who you trust with what I've told you. Hayes studied her face one last time, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, he nodded once. 0900, Canyon Ridge Motel. Catherine turned to leave, then paused. Your father once told me you had his eyes and his stubborn streak. He was right about both. With that, she walked quickly down the memorial path, heading for the eastern perimeter, where Chen had arranged a gap in the security protocols. Behind her, Lieutenant Jason Hayes stood holding his father's wings, his world fundamentally altered by a truth 27 years in the making. The Canyon Ridge Motel sat just outside the town of Falcon, Arizona, its weathered sign and single-story structure suggesting better days in the past. Catherine had chosen it deliberately small enough to notice strangers, remote enough to provide warning of approach, with multiple exit routes and a clear line of sight to the surrounding desert. After leaving Eagle Ridge, she had driven a circuitous route to ensure she wasn't followed, switching vehicles twice using arrangements Barrett had made. By nightfall, she was established in room 12, a sparse but clean accommodation with a view of both the parking lot and the access road. Barrett joined her shortly after 2100 hours, bringing updates from the base. Blackwood has implemented full security protocols. He reported accepting the coffee Catherine offered. Every person on base is being revalidated. Every access log for the past week is under review. He's particularly interested in the simulator facility and who authorized your access. Catherine nodded, having expected nothing less. Chen, maintaining her cover, she's cooperating with the investigation, providing edited logs that show your visit, but obscure the connection to Operation Shadowfall. So far, Blackwood seems to be buying it. He won't for long, Catherine said. He's thorough. It's why he was chosen to sanitize the Phantom 7 records after the program was terminated. Barrett settled into the room's only chair. Hayes? He's processing, Catherine replied, but he believed me, or at least believed enough to agree to meet tomorrow. If he can get off base, Barrett pointed out, Blackwood has suspended all leave and pass privileges pending completion of the security review. Catherine smiled slightly. Hayes is his father's son. If he wants to be here tomorrow, he'll find a way. Barrett didn't appear convinced. And if Blackwood connects him to you, if he realizes the son of a Phantom 7 operator is asking questions about his father's real death, then I'll deal with Blackwood, Catherine said simply. Barrett recognized the tone, the same quiet certainty with which Catherine had once accepted the most dangerous missions. You can't just deal with a duty senior investigator, Catherine. Those days are over. Are they, she asked, her gaze steady, the same people who buried Phantom 7, who created false reports about Hayes' death, who potentially eliminated our former teammates, they're still operating with impunity. Maybe those days aren't as over as we thought. Before Barrett could respond, his secure phone vibrated. He answered, listened briefly, then ended the call, his expression grim. That was Chen. Blackwood's team just seized the simulator records from today. They know someone ran the Operation Shadowfall scenario. Catherine absorbed this news calmly. How long until they identify me? Hours, not days. They're reviewing security camera footage from the entire base. And Hayes? Barrett hesitated. He's been placed on restricted duty, pending security clearance verification. Officially, it's routine during a base-wide security review. Unofficially, they're isolating him, Catherine finished. Standard counterintelligence procedure when you suspect information compromise. What's our play? Barrett asked, automatically deferring to Catherine's tactical judgment as he had during their Phantom 7 days. Catherine moved to the window, checking the parking lot before responding. We accelerate. If Hayes can't come to us, we go to him. Tonight. Barrett stared at her. You want to break into a secured military facility while it's under active counterintelligence review? That's suicide. Not break in, Catherine corrected. You still have access. Chen has internal positioning. We create a controlled extraction scenario. Extraction, Barrett repeated incredulously. You're talking about kidnapping a U.S. military officer from his own base. I'm talking about fulfilling my promise to Marcus Hayes, Catherine countered, and protecting his son from people who would bury the truth along with anyone who discovers it. Barrett ran a hand through his graying hair, the weight of decades in intelligence work evident in his expression. Catherine, I've supported you because I believe Hayes deserves the truth. But this crosses a line I'm not sure I can step over. Catherine turned from the window, her gaze softening slightly. James, we crossed that line 30 years ago when we joined Phantom 7. We accepted that some operations exist outside normal parameters because the normal parameters can't address certain threats. This is no different. The threat being Blackwood, the threat being the systematic erasure of sacrifices made by people like Marcus Hayes, Catherine corrected. The threat being a government that buries its own heroes to protect its political convenience. Barrett was silent for a long moment, weighing decades of service against the moral imperative Catherine presented. Finally, he nodded. I'll contact Chen, see if she can arrange access to Hayes without triggering additional security protocols. Catherine smiled slightly. Thank you, James. Don't thank me yet, he replied grimly. This could still go very wrong. Why? The plan came together with the precision that had characterized Phantom 7 operations. Barrett would return to base using his authority as Air Marshal to gain access to the restricted areas. Chen would create a temporary security clearance issue requiring Lieutenant Hayes to report to Barrett's office for verification. From there, they would move Hayes to a secondary location where Catherine waited. Simple, clean, except for the dozens of ways it could go catastrophically wrong. Catherine prepared methodically, checking and rechecking the equipment. Barrett had brought secure communication devices, digital files containing evidence of Operation Shadowfall contingency plans for various scenarios. She had learned long ago that survival depended on preparation, anticipating problems before they materialized, having solutions ready when they did. At precisely 2300 hours, Barrett called from the base. Phase 1 complete. Chen has arranged the meeting for 2330. Hayes will be escorted to my office under pretext of security clearance review. His current status, Catherine asked. Confined to quarters except for official duties. Under observation but not formal restriction. Blackwood's team has interviewed him once, already standard procedure for all personnel with access to the simulator facility. Does he suspect? Hard to say, Barrett replied. He's his father's son, plays his cards close to the vest. But Chen reports he seemed unusually alert during the interview, answering questions precisely without volunteering additional information. Good, Catherine said. He's keeping operational security. What about Blackwood? Still focused on the simulator logs and security camera footage. His team has expanded the investigation to include all base visitors for the past month. It's only a matter of time before they connect the dots to you. Catherine checked her watch. Stick to the timetable. I'll be in position at 2345. The secondary location, a rarely used maintenance facility on the eastern edge of the base, had been Chen's suggestion. Far from the main security checkpoints, accessible through service roads and scheduled for decommissioning the following month, it offered both privacy and deniability. Catherine arrived at the designated time using the access code Chen had provided to enter through a service entrance. The facility's interior was dimly lit, filled with decommissioned equipment awaiting disposal. She positioned herself near the main entrance, out of direct line of sight, but with clear view of anyone entering. At 2358, Barrett's voice came through her earpiece. Approaching with package, ETA 2 minutes, no tail. Catherine acknowledged with a single click of her transmitter. 2 minutes later, the facility door opened, and Barrett entered, followed by Lieutenant Hayes. The young officer's expression was a mixture of confusion and wariness, but he moved with the confident bearing of someone prepared for unexpected situations. When Hayes saw Catherine step from the shadows, his confusion gave way to recognition, then to alert focus. Miss Sullivan? Lieutenant, she acknowledged. Thank you for coming. Hayes glanced at Barrett, who had moved to secure the door. Didn't have much choice. Is someone going to explain why I'm being smuggled to an abandoned maintenance facility in the middle of the night? Because what I have to show you can't be shown anywhere on base without triggering security protocols, Catherine explained. She gestured to a small table where she had set up a secure laptop. This contains the real files on Operation Shadowfall, the mission your father died completing. Hayes approached cautiously. How did you get classified files? I didn't, Catherine replied. Barrett did. He was our intelligence officer during Phantom 7 operations. He's maintained his own secure archives insurance against the day when someone might try to erase what we did completely. Barrett joined them at the table. These files exist outside the official DoD and CIA databases. They're the only remaining evidence of what really happened in the Hindu Kush in 1998. Hayes looked between them, weighing his options. Finally, his desire for truth outweighed his military caution. Show me. Catherine activated the laptop, entering a complex password. The screen displayed a mission brief dated September 12, 1998. The header bore classification markings so high they were rarely seen even by senior military officers, along with a distinctive emblem, two crossed rotors beneath a stylized dagger, the same symbol tattooed on Catherine's neck. Operation Shadowfall, she began, was a direct action mission against a terrorist training facility established by Osama bin Laden's network in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Intelligence had identified the facility as a planning center for potential attacks against U.S. interests. Hayes leaned forward, studying the documents with the focused attention of a trained officer. The mission brief detailed operational parameters that would have been considered extraordinary even by special operations standards: two-person crew modified stealth, Apache complete deniability if captured or killed. This was 3 years before 9/11, Hayes said quietly, before al-Qaeda was publicly identified as a primary threat. Some people within the intelligence community recognized the threat earlier, Barrett explained. Phantom 7 was created specifically to address emerging threats that conventional forces couldn't engage due to political or diplomatic constraints. Catherine navigated to another file, the official after-action report she had filed following the mission. It detailed the ambush, the aircraft damage, Hayes' mortal wound, and the extraction under impossible conditions. My father died completing this mission, Hayes said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. A mission that potentially prevented attacks that could have killed thousands. And instead of honoring that sacrifice, they buried it, erased it. Why, Vaughn? Because the mission exceeded authorized parameters, Barrett replied. Because acknowledging it would have admitted the United States was conducting military operations in sovereign nations without declaration of war or congressional oversight. And Catherine added, because certain individuals had authorized these operations without proper approval, placing their careers at risk if the truth emerged. Blackwood, Hayes said, connecting the dots. Catherine nodded. Among others, he was part of the oversight committee that eventually shut down Phantom 7 after determining it represented an unacceptable risk of unauthorized action. After 9/11, when the very threats we had identified became public knowledge, he led the effort to ensure our earlier operations remained classified. Hayes straightened, military bearing asserting itself as he processed this information. What happens now? You've shown me the truth. What am I supposed to do with it? Catherine regarded him steadily. That's your choice, Lieutenant. I made a promise to tell you the truth. What you do with that truth is up to you. If I report this, I'll be immediately detained for accessing classified information without authorization, Hayes reasoned him. If I say nothing, I'm complicit in covering up the real circumstances of my father's death. There is a third option, Barrett said carefully. The files contain sufficient evidence to trigger a congressional inquiry if delivered to the right people. Members of the intelligence oversight committees who weren't involved in the original cover-up. Hayes' expression hardened with decision. I want those files. Before Catherine could respond, Chen's urgent voice came through their earpieces. Security breach. Blackwood's team has accessed my communications log. They know about the meeting with Hayes. Base security is mobilizing. Barrett moved immediately to the door, checking the exterior through a small window. How much time? Minutes, Chen replied. They're starting with the main administrative buildings working outward. Catherine began copying files to a secure drive, her movements quick but precise. We need to move, now. Hayes watched her work, a new understanding dawning in his expression. You knew this might happen. You came prepared for it. I've spent my career preparing for contingencies, Catherine replied without looking up. It's why I'm still alive when most of my unit isn't. Barrett returned from the window. Vehicle approaching. Military police. We're out of time. Catherine handed the secure drive to Hayes. Everything you need is on here. Your father's real service record, the mission details, the subsequent cover-up. What you do with it is your decision. Hayes accepted the drive, then looked directly at Catherine. What about you? They'll be looking for you now. I've been avoiding people looking for me for 30 years, Lieutenant, she replied with a hint of a smile. I'll be fine. Barrett interrupted urgently. They're deploying a perimeter, standard containment protocol. We need to exit now or we'll be trapped. Catherine nodded, then turned back to Hayes. Your father was the finest pilot I ever flew with. He believed what we were doing mattered, even if no one would ever know about it. Whatever you decide, remember that. Hayes straightened to attention, then saluted her with formal precision. Thank you for keeping your promise, Major Sullivan. Catherine returned the salute the first time she had done so since leaving active service decades earlier. Honor your father by making the right choice, Lieutenant, not the easy one. Barrett led them through a service corridor toward a rear exit, checking for security personnel as they moved. At a junction, he paused. Catherine, take Hayes through the eastern exit. There's less coverage there. I'll create a diversion at the main gate. What kind of diversion? Hayes asked. The loud, attention-grabbing kind, Barrett replied with grim humor. Go now. Catherine and Hayes continued through the darkened corridors, moving with the silent efficiency of trained operators. They reached the eastern exit without encountering security personnel, but could hear radio chatter indicating a base-wide search was underway. Outside, the desert night was clear and cold, the stars providing just enough illumination to navigate by. Catherine led Hayes toward a drainage culvert that ran beneath the perimeter fence, a vulnerability she had identified during her earlier reconnaissance. Once we're clear of the fence, head northwest for half a mile, she instructed. There's a vehicle waiting. It'll take you to a secure location where you can decide your next move. Hayes hesitated. What about you? I have my own extraction plan, Catherine replied. Always have a backup lieutenant. First rule of special operations. They reached the culvert, a tight squeeze for adults but passable with effort. As Hayes prepared to enter, the night erupted with sound and light from the direction of the main gate. Barrett's diversion had begun. That's our cue, Catherine said. Move fast. Stay low. Don't stop until you reach the vehicle. Hayes nodded, understanding the operational necessity. He extended his hand. I don't know if I'll see you again, Major, but thank you for everything. Catherine clasped his hand briefly. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, Jason. Never doubt that. Hayes disappeared into the culvert. Catherine followed, emerging on the other side of the perimeter fence, just as alarms began sounding across the base. They separated as planned, Hayes heading northwest toward the extraction vehicle, Catherine moving southwest toward her own escape route. As she crested a small rise, Catherine paused, looking back at Eagle Ridge. Searchlights swept the perimeter, security vehicles raced along access roads, and the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors indicated aerial support was being deployed. A full-scale security response, exactly what she had anticipated and planned for. Barrett would be detained briefly, then released, his rank and position providing sufficient cover for his involvement. Chen had established deniability through careful manipulation of the security logs. And Hayes now possessed the truth his father had died to protect, along with evidence of those who had buried that truth for their own purposes. What he would do with that evidence was his choice. But Catherine had fulfilled her promise, a promise made in the mountains of Afghanistan 27 years earlier, as Marcus Hayes bled out in the cockpit behind her. As she turned to continue her escape, Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the weight of an obligation carried for decades. Whether Hayes chose to make the truth public or to honor his father's sacrifice privately, she had completed her mission. The ghost of Marcus Hayes could finally rest, and with it perhaps the ghosts of Phantom 7 that had haunted her for so long. In the distance, an Apache helicopter lifted off from Eagle Ridge, its distinctive silhouette visible against the star-filled sky. Catherine watched it rise, remembering countless missions flown in identical aircraft missions that had shaped history from the shadows. Then she disappeared into the desert night, as she had so many times before, leaving no trace of her passage, save for the truth she had finally delivered. Some promises transcended time classification and even death itself. Some missions continued long after the official records were sealed. And some pilots, the truly exceptional ones, found ways to fly beyond the boundaries of what others believed possible. Catherine Sullivan, once known as Phantom Actual, had done exactly that. One last mission, one final flight, the most important one of all.